Breaking right now on Morning News Now, escalation across the Mideast on day 3 of the war against Iran. New video this morning of one of 3 American warplanes going down in Kuwait in what officials are now calling an incident of friendly fire. All crew members survived. Also today, Israel launching a new campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon's capital city. All this after this weekend's joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran that killed hundreds of people, including the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, Iran retaliating with its own series of attacks on Israel, as well as several other targets across the Middle East that killed at least 3 American troops. Now, President Trump back in Washington after warning that more casualties could come.
We pray for the full recovery of the wounded and send our immense love and eternal gratitude to the families of the fallen. And sadly, there will likely be more.
Meanwhile, across the U.S., a mix of celebration and protest over the attacks.
All the diaspora of Iranians are chanting and excited because we see freedom at hand.
We are ready for a new government, the regime change in Iran.
The vast majority of Americans do not want yet another endless war in the Middle East. It's disgusting that we do not have our basic needs met, but we have enough money supposedly to bomb people across the world.
We have a lot to get to on this Monday morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm happy to be back with you. I'm Savannah Sellers.
It is good to have you back on a busy Monday. I'm Joe Fryer. Let's get right to it. We have a team of correspondents and analysts standing by to break down the very latest from the Middle East to Washington. Let's begin with NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons, who is in Dubai with the latest. Keir, good morning. We know over the weekend the U.S. and Israel hit thousands of targets in Iran after killing Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Bring us up to speed on just how this joint campaign has progressed since the first strikes were launched more than 48 hours ago.
Well, I think the crucial news this morning, of course, is the downing of those U.S. fighter jets in Kuwait. Let me just take you through that, because that, of course, is what folks will be worrying about back home the most. Now, the U.S. military now saying that friendly fire took down those 3 F-15 fighter jets over Kuwait. I just want to read you some of what CENTCOM says in its statement in the past few hours. During active combat that included attacks from Iranian aircraft, ballistic missiles and drones, the U.S. Air Force fighter jets were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defenses. All 6 aircrew ejected safely, having been safely recovered and are in a stable condition. Kuwait has acknowledged this incident. So the latest fatalities for the U.S. military in what President Trump, as you played there at the top, said would be a difficult operation that might be deadly for U.S. forces. Meanwhile, as you mentioned, we are here in Dubai, where we have had a weekend of really relentless attacks by missiles and drones. At one point, that building you can see behind me there is the Burj Khalifa. It is the tallest building in the world. At one point, a drone flew right by it. There have been explosions at the airport here in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi and at the airport in Kuwait. The Iranians accused of choosing not just air bases across this region being used by U.S. forces as well as by Gulf forces, but also being accused of targeting civilian targets. Now, much of these munitions have been shot down. Today, it is much quieter here, except for the sound of fighter jets overhead. The air defenses here in the United Arab Emirates have worked, frankly, stunningly well. I would estimate around 1% of the drones and missiles got through. But what the Iranians here are trying to do is to target the economy and to frighten regional governments, its neighbors, into going to Washington and demanding an end to the war. But really, the other issue, Joe, is the way that this is all escalating, spiraling even. So there is now contact between Israeli forces and Hezbollah in Lebanon. That appears to be a new front that is opening up. We're just getting news of a tanker targeted off Oman, the Strait of Hormuz, not far from here, which we, Joe, through the weekend, have talked about, is a crucial choke point for commercial shipping, and particularly oil and gas. 20% of the world's oil and gas passing through there. That is effectively closed. I did manage to speak to a former Iranian commander in Tehran with close connections to the government. He, when I spoke to him, denied that the Iranians are targeting civilian places in this region, but it is, though, leaving governments here furious. And that seems to be backfiring on Iran, turning local governments that might have had some sympathy for the Iranians against them.
Here we know, and thank you for the latest on these U.S. planes that were downed again. As you mentioned, it seems by friendly fire. We know no casualties there, though there have been a few U.S. casualties up to this point. In a video posted to Truth Social yesterday, President Trump shared a message about that. Let's listen.
Earlier today, CENTCOM shared the news that 3 U.S. military service members have been killed in action. Sadly, there will likely be more. Before it ends, that's the way it is. Likely be more, but we'll do everything possible where that won't be the case.
Keir, what do we know at this time about the U.S. service members that have been killed or injured so far in this conflict?
Well, honestly, just a limited amount. It did happen in Kuwait. They were stationed in Kuwait. The president, in that statement, the government, the Trump administration, being clear, and this is always the thoughtful way that these things are handled, that they need to speak to the servicemen and women's families. So we wait to get more news on those fatalities, but again, it does speak to what a high-risk operation this was to launch by President Trump. And I think we will look. There are days of this, maybe even weeks of this ahead, and inevitably, once a war begins, both sides lose a little bit of control, some control over exactly how events play out.
Keir, we've been talking about the fact you mentioned the explosions there in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and nations throughout the region that go beyond the military bases there. And a lot of people have been perplexed by Iran's strategy in doing so. Does there appear to be a clear strategy for Iran at this point? Is it backfiring?
Well, look, I think there is a strategy. I would describe the Iranian strategy like this: cause chaos. Then, as I mentioned earlier, Joe, try to put pressure on regional governments that have relationships with Washington to go to Washington and say, you've got to stop this. We can't take this. But I think there is also another aspect to this. And again, when I spoke to a former IRGC commander in Tehran this morning, I raised this with him, and he quite straightforwardly told me that there are IRGC units, there are Islamic Republican Guard Corps units in Iran that may well be operating without communication to the leadership, just following tasks that they will have been given, assigned prior to this war beginning, and that they would have been told to take action even if they are not given instructions from Tehran's. And that I think is one of the issues here. The way that this can escalate is that you have a whole number of pieces all shifting all at the same time. That is the nature of war, and that is why launching a war is inevitably such high risk. Now look, again, we do not know. In the weeks ahead, we may come to conclude that President Trump brought about regime change in Iran. The people may begin to rise up. There may be an outcome to this that historians will say was beneficial for the Iranian people. But there is also, just conversely, at its most dire, if you like, the risk that the country collapses, that the different ethnic groups in Iran turn on each other. And that would be problematic, to say the least, for this region. I mean, Iran is just a short distance across the sea from where I am. So, you know, this is... We could talk for most of your show about the ways that this could go. We simply cannot say, and that is the risk that President Trump has taken.
And we will continue to talk through the rest of these hours here this morning. Keir, you and your family, please continue to stay safe. We appreciate your reporting.
Well, for more on Iran's retaliation against Israel specifically, let's bring in NBC News, international correspondent Matt Bradley. He is in Tel Aviv. Matt, good morning. I want to start with Lebanon. Things have escalated overnight, and we also have a recent update here. So Hezbollah, that is this militant Iranian proxy group in Lebanon, has been launching missiles at Israel in what it says is retaliation for the supreme leader's killing. In response, the Israeli military has launched an offensive that it says is likely to last for, quote, several days. Just a few moments ago, though, we do have an update from the Lebanese prime minister announcing a ban on all of these activities from Hezbollah, calling them illegal. Tell us the latest on the ground, and also if you think a call like that from the Lebanese prime minister could quell this particular violence in any way.
Yeah, these are all great questions, and exactly the questions that everybody in the region is asking right now. Is this a new front in this ever-expanding conflict? As Keir was mentioning, this has long since been spilling over borders. We're seeing things going on in Iraq, lots of political unrest there, attacks throughout the Gulf, and now Lebanon. Now, this border had been quiet, at least from the Hezbollah side, for the better part of the past year and a half, ever since the Biden administration helped to negotiate an agreement between Hezbollah and Israel that largely calmed the fighting. The Israelis have been launching strikes into Lebanon and Hezbollah targets almost every single day since then. For the past year and a half, Hezbollah has not fired at Israel during that time. But now they've said that they want to essentially avenge the death of Ali Khamenei, the Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, and a man who had been one of Hezbollah's greatest patrons, really the greatest patron of Hezbollah. Hezbollah was built by Iran back in the 1980s. So this is a group that owes so much to the Iranians, and it's why a lot of people here are wondering whether or not these attacks by Hezbollah into northern Israel were maybe just sort of a gun salute, or they sort of a tribute. And that's more or less what Hezbollah had been saying, which calls into question whether or not this is going to be a sustained attack. Nevertheless, we heard from the Israelis today in comments that were from, basically the spokesperson that I was speaking to, all the way up to senior officials, saying that they are getting ready to attack if necessary. They say they've launched an offensive that so far, according to Lebanese health officials, say has killed 31 people in Lebanon, and nearly 150 others were injured. So this is a conflict that could get a whole lot worse before it gets better. It really depends on what Hezbollah wants to do here. Hezbollah has been badly beaten down by the Israelis over years of war, particularly since October 7th. Now, it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to reconstitute their forces. At the same time, the Israelis are saying that they are not taking any precautions. They constantly reiterate that they have learned their lessons from October 7th, and they're not going to let Hezbollah sit on their border.
Matt, let's talk more about what you are seeing there in Israel. We know yesterday an Iranian missile evaded Israel's strong defense systems, killing several people in a residential neighborhood just outside of Jerusalem. You were on the scene of one of these incidents. What more can you tell us about that deadly attack, and just overall what life has been like there in Israel over these past 3 days?
Yeah, this was a really tragic thing to witness. I mean, we saw what looked like bombed out cars, destroyed buildings, as you're seeing on your screen right now. This was a really tragic scene, striking a community that is a pretty tight-knit, very conservative religious community here in Israel. A lot of these folks didn't necessarily have access to safe rooms, bomb shelters inside their homes. So they all went into public bomb shelters. And in this case, this was a bomb shelter that was underground, underneath a synagogue. and it took, according to police, a direct hit. Now, this is going to be very disturbing to Israelis, not just because this is the highest casualty count that we've seen so far in this conflict from Iranian attacks on Israel, but also because of the people who were inside this safe room, this mamad, as it's called in Hebrew. So many Israelis are relying on these bomb shelters to keep them safe as these Iranian attacks appear relentless. These people were killed inside of one, which is rare, and police have said these shelters aren't built to take a direct hit.
All right, Matt Bradley, thank you very much for reporting there from Israel for us.
As President Trump said in that recorded message last night, U.S. strikes will continue in Iran this week. Let's bring in NBC News military analyst Colonel Steve Warren for more on what to expect in these coming days. Colonel, good to have you with us. Just based on your experience, what do you imagine is happening behind the scenes at U.S. Central Command as this war stretches into day 3, especially after we've learned this morning about those 3 U.S. aircraft accidentally shot down by Kuwait? What was your reaction upon hearing that? Is that the type of thing, these friendly fire incidents, we could expect to see more of as this conflict moves forward?
I think it's the type of thing that we will see less of as the conflict moves forward. And here's why. In the early days of any operation, whether it's combat operations or even training operations, risk is always a little bit higher. Why? It's because everyone involved in the operation is settling in, trying to understand what the different pieces are, understanding how the units, subordinate units to the flanks, partner and coalition units, in this case the Kuwaitis, how they operate, what frequencies do they use on the radio, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we've seen this in other conflicts as well. The friendly fire incidents often are a little bit higher in the early days before everyone sort of works out what their roles are. In Central Command in Tampa and in their overseas headquarters right now, I think they are probably primarily focused on servicing targets. So we have from the president sort of the objective list, right? Destroy the Iranian missile capability, destroy the Iranian missile production capability, sink the Iranian Navy, et cetera. So they are now looking at every target that they have so far struck, or in the military we often say serviced, looking at all the targets that they've serviced, assessing the damage that's been done to those targets, determining whether or not those targets need to be reattacked, or determining if they can move on to the next target on the list.
Colonel, I think also, of course, a bigger picture objective here, right, is regime change. Something that was so notable in the first video that we saw from the president over this weekend was essentially calling on the Iranian people almost to like pick it up from here, rise up against this government. Is it possible, do you think, for regime change to take place through this Operation Epic Fury with airstrikes alone and a hope that something happens on the ground without U.S. boots on the ground in Iran?
Well, regime change cannot happen with just airstrikes. So something has to happen in order to cause the regime to change. In that case, can only be 2 things: boots on the ground, as you described, or an uprising inside of Iran. So the real question is, will these strikes generate enough energy for the Iranians to rise up and overthrow their country? I have not seen any evidence that the United States is preparing to put significant ground forces into play here. In other words, if we were going to invade Iran, it would take weeks, if not months, for us to, and I'll use, again, a military term, generate combat power. What does that mean? That means stationing offensive troops on the ground nearby in a place where they could invade. And to be clear, to invade a nation the size of Iran and essentially take it over, you're talking hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of troops. So this would be a major mobilization. We've seen no evidence of that happening. So I don't believe that we are planning to commit significant troop numbers on the ground. Now, there could easily be a situation where we use very precise special operations forces to conduct specific missions on the ground, but I think that's all we're going to see.
Colonel, let's talk about Iran's response here. It has conducted these retaliatory strikes of its own, hitting Israel and other Arab states with rounds of ballistic missiles and drones, and not just U.S. military bases. What do you make of the counteroffensive so far? Does it seem like Iran has the firepower to sustain this for weeks if necessary?
Right. So that's the other thing that I believe is happening in U.S. Central Command right now. Presumably they have a list. They know exactly how many launchers the Iranians have, probably have an idea of how many actual ballistic missiles the Iranians have, and have a sense for how many of these Shahed drones the Iranians have. And with every airstrike, there is someone in Central Command checking off, okay, there's one less launcher, one less launcher. So we don't know exactly how large the Iranian missile stockpiles and the Shahed drone stockpiles are, but we know they're dwindling rapidly. And they're dwindling for two reasons. One, because the Iranians are expending them. And two, because the U.S. and Israeli forces are striking them. So these munitions are being reduced very rapidly. That said, the Shahed drones, which have been somewhat effective in the last 48 to 72 hours, they're relatively cheap and easy to make. So I think the Iranians will be able to sustain this for some time. But again, we are continuing to degrade those capabilities.
Colonel Warren, always appreciate your expertise. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Let's turn now to Washington and check in with NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake and also our political reporter Megan Leibowitz. Good morning to both of you. Garrett, I will start with you to talk through the timing here from the president's perspective, how he made this decision. I know we have some NBC News reporting on just how these talks were going between the U.S. and Iran that we had heard at one point were potentially making progress. And then you fast forward to Saturday and we know what has unfolded since then. Walk us through what we know about those talks, this potential deal that we had heard from the Minister of Oman may have been in reach. Obviously, it was not. What was the determination here for the president?
Yeah, Savannah, the way senior administration officials describe it, this deal was actually quite a long way off. They briefed reporters on Saturday and said that essentially Iran was unwilling to accept even an offer from the United States to provide unlimited free fuel for a purely civilian nuclear program in perpetuity, and that the Iranians were unwilling to discuss their ballistic missile program entirely. The officials involved in those talks ultimately felt like Iran just wasn't serious about striking a deal. So that was kind of the big picture lead up to where we were. And then in terms of the proximate cause of these strikes, the administration has really said two things. First, they've said that there was some kind of imminent threat from the Iranian ballistic missile program. That has not been backed up by any evidence presented publicly. And then what we've also heard from sources familiar with the administration's thinking here was that they saw this opportunity to strike on Saturday during the day, which is very unusual, to kill not just the Ayatollah, but a number of his top deputies, essentially take out the whole top leadership tier of the Iranian regime. So that's been the sort of picture of how we got to this moment that the administration has painted thus far, although they're doing it kind of in bits and pieces, not with the traditional, White House speech by the president, although we may get some more of these answers from this Pentagon briefing later today.
Yeah, and Garrett, and I think a lot of people found that a little strange that we haven't had this sort of traditional address to the nation sort of laying out the case for why this is happening. We've had those videos posted on Truth Social, a lot of just short phone calls with reporters throughout Washington. So that's kind of where we're getting information from the president. What is it he's saying, first of all, about these casualties that we've been mentioning throughout this hour, and just in general, how long he thinks this whole military operation is going to last?
It is so unusual, Joe, and I feel like you and I talked about this late last week, the idea that the president had not been making the case to the American public about why strikes might be necessary if he ultimately had to order them, as he's now done so. He's told reporters that he thinks this process could last 4 to 5 weeks, potentially, but he's also described it as ahead of schedule. And frankly, given the kind of changing answers he's given about what exactly the end goal is here, I think a timeline is hard to nail down. On casualties, the president had said in his first Truth Social video on Saturday that he thought there might be some, and in a conversation with our colleague Peter Nicholas yesterday, that he accepted that the casualties would happen in an operation like this and that he thinks they could continue. He also said essentially that this operation he hopes will be great for the world at the end of the day, suggesting that sacrifices made by Americans would ultimately be worth it. Joe?
Megan, let's bring you in here. Democrats argue the president should have consulted Congress before attacking Iran. Tell us more about their reaction here and what that means we could see this week, like a potential vote to restrict the president's war powers.
Yeah, that's right. So Democrats and even some Republicans as well have been criticizing the president and the administration for not going to Congress first to get congressional approval before taking part in this operation. We're also hearing from critics in Congress who are raising questions about what comes next in Iran. Is the U.S. actually safer now that this attack has unfolded? And what are the administration's plans for actually achieving the objectives that the president has laid out? I want you to take a listen to what some Democrats in Congress had to say over the weekend.
My sense is that they did not go into this with any kind of strategic plan. It was an operation with no discussion about what comes next.
Khomeini was a brutal dictator, but Americans are not safer today. So the question is the country going to descend in civil war? Are billions of our dollars going to be spent there? Are American troops going to be at risk?
So now Democrats and some Republicans are pushing for a war powers vote this week, which, if passed, would basically mean that the president, it would restrict the president's ability for future military operations in Iran without going to Congress first. Now, a big caveat here is Congress has tried this before. They've tried to pass war powers resolutions related to restrict the president's ability to use the military without getting congressional approval first for Venezuela, for the Caribbean, and even in Iran last year after those previous U.S. airstrikes against nuclear facilities in Iran. Now, those votes all failed, so we're going to expect to hear more about this week. We don't have exact timing for when this vote could potentially happen.
Megan, no surprise we'd have questions from Democrats, but there are questions about the Republican reaction. We know on the campaign trail, President Trump said no more foreign wars or regime changes. This was part of his America First agenda. So are there Republicans, especially in his MAGA base, who are supporting the president's actions, even though this goes against that campaign promise?
Yeah, so I will say that most Republicans in Congress have been backing the president's decision to take part in these operations. They've been arguing that the U.S. is safer with these operations taking place and defending the president's authority for actually engaging in these operations without going to Congress first. Senator Lindsey Graham has been one of the most vocal advocates for these strikes and one of the most vocal supporters of the president's decision to do this. Take a listen to what he had to say yesterday on Meet the Press.
The mothership of terrorism is sinking. The captain is dead. Well done, President Trump. It's been the policy of this country for decades to eliminate this regime. President Trump did it.
There is a contingent of Republicans, though, as you mentioned, who said, hey, wait a minute, the president promised no more foreign wars. The president said America first. And in their view, this is contradicting that. So I do want to point you to a post from former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who said, who pointed to the president's campaign promises and said, it's always a lie and it's always America last. So senators are going to be back in D.C. today, and lawmakers are going to get classified briefings tomorrow. So we're expecting to hear more reaction as this continues to unfold.
All right, Megan and Garrett, thank you both very much.
The death of Ayatollah Khamenei has many asking who will be the next leader in Iran. For more, let's bring in Alex Vitanka. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Alex, good to have you with us. We know Iranian state media says that President Mahmoud Pezeshkian survived the attacks over the weekend. He was elected just a couple years ago. Had previously vowed to try and renew these discussions with the U.S. to end the sanctions there, to reach some sort of agreement. Right now, does it seem like he is the at least temporary head of the Iranian state?
Joe, good to be with you. Look, in terms of his formal role right now, he remains the president. He has now joined two other men in what they call an interim council. They're supposed to run the place, if you will, until the country is in a situation where they can choose the next supreme leader, if you will. But here's an opportunity for Pezeshkian to actually stand up and maybe speak a different language. He came on it, essentially the Iranians voted for him because he promised massive change. He has not delivered in a year and a half he's been there. Is this an opportunity for him now, with the old man dead, to sort of stand out and say, you know, the whole country wants change? If it means speaking to Trump, even as Trump is dropping bombs on us, maybe that's not a bad thing. But I don't think he's going to do that anytime soon. I think what I'm getting out of Iran is, for now, they're just hunkering down. The military aspect of what they're doing seems to be the focus for them right now.
Alex, in a recent article, you also mentioned how Iran's opposition movement, it's wide, it's large, it's also divided. You said it's divided by geography, generation, ideology, and exposure to repression. With no clear leader in that movement, who has the best chance of coming to power in the event of a popular revolution?
So, look, I think that the key here, and we heard this just in the segment before, is does the United States right now have a roadmap in terms of a strategy on the ground to help? Because the president's, the clearest thing I get from President Trump now in terms of what the end objective is no longer about the nuclear issue or the missiles, frankly. It's about something bigger. It's about regime change in that nation state. And that, to me, suggests you need to have something in terms of a game plan on the ground. I haven't seen that yet from the administration. But if they want to go in that direction, the first thing they need to do is to help the Iranian opposition outside of the country to organize, and they need to start looking for people inside the country to essentially defect. It could be people like Pezeshkian. Is that good enough for many? Because they will consider him as part of the old regime. He won't be acceptable to many. But then what about lower ranks inside the regime? Because somebody has to be there to take over when this country of 92 million, the size of Alaska or 3 times the size of France, if it collapses, it's in nobody's interest. So the United States needs to start thinking along the lines that if this is not weeks and months to come, there needs to be much more investment on the political front to start thinking about the day after, once the military side has been achieved, what comes politically.
Is there your sense there is someone or some group that the U.S. could identify to work with that would be capable of leading that opposition? And what more specifically would you need to see America do to try and help make that happen? Does it need to be more than bombs?
So, Joe, the one thing that I would point out right now is the president has made it very clear. He wants the Iranian people, who by and large, I would say 90% of them hated Ayatollah Khamenei and hate this regime. But the sort of banking on them to command the streets in the middle of a war, that's a risky strategy. People are going to put their lives first. So I don't think that's something we can expect. People taking over the state machinery. They might command the streets, but for them to take over, that's a different story, which means what could the opposition look like? Look, there are folks in the opposition outside the U.S. can work with, Crown Princess of Pahlavi and others who have been in this business or been in opposition for a long time. But very critical for them to quickly link up to folks inside of Iran. I think that's the key here. The idea that the opposition is going to fly in from Washington D.C. to Tehran, it's kind of a hope. It needs to be much more elaborate, and you need to have a game plan for that sort of thing to essentially happen.
Alex Vitanka, good to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.